Every December, Miller's Ridge braced itself for the inevitable blizzards, but this winter storm surpassed anything the townsfolk dared recall. The snow began after midnight and refused to yield, piling against windows, swallowing familiar landmarks. Duke awoke before sunrise, as his habit demanded, and listened to the wind hiss through the seams of his cabin. The quiet inside was misleading. Outside, the cold would bite through layers. It would test anyone foolish or desperate enough to be out there. Duke dressed methodically. Thermal shirt, worn jeans, wool socks, then 3 layers more for warmth. He prepared strong coffee, surveying the flickering power, uncertain if the generator would last the morning. As he opened his front door, the storm met him with a slap. He considered skipping the fence check. Who would be out in weather like this? But routine anchored him, helped him forget. The drive was slow, visibility near zero, headlights barely cutting the swirling white. Ice rimmed the windshield. Duke gripped the steering wheel tightly, memories of last year's blizzard creeping up, the stranded motorists, the livestock found too late. Miller's Ridge rewarded caution only with survival. The first stretch of road was deserted as expected, but as Duke rounded a bend before Echo Pines, something strange caught his eye. A dark, unmoving shape just beyond the shoulder, half buried by a drifting snowbank. Instinct stopped his truck cold. For a moment, with the engine idling and the heater humming, he hesitated. Then, bracing against the flurry, he stepped out. She was little, 6, 7 years old at most. Her coat was grossly oversized, moisture seeping through. Blonde hair framed her pale, pinched face, strands trapped by ice. She did not cry. Instead, her gaze locked straight onto Duke, and her hands clutched a battered, stuffed rabbit, ears frozen in place. Duke knelt beside her, gently checking for signs of injury. "Where's your family?" His voice, cracked by disuse, sounded foreign. The little girl blinked. Her lips trembled, but her voice was certain, almost rehearsed. "Mom said you can help us." Duke's insides tightened. "What's your name?" "Sophie." He glanced around, searching for tracks, a car, any trace. "Who's with you? Where did you come from?" Sophie's reply was barely audible above the wind. "We were walking. I lost Mom. She told me to keep going until I found you. She was with me. I think she fell." Duke wrapped his scarf around her neck, shielding her face from the cold. "Let's get you inside." His mind raced. Should he search now, call for help, take her back? He chose speed. He picked her up gently, placing her rabbit in her lap, and hurried to the truck. Inside, Sophie huddled near the heater. Duke dialed the sheriff's office, but the lines were down. Even the emergency channels clicked out with static. His phone's battery blinked red. "We'll try again when we get you warm." The ride to Duke's cabin passed in tense silence. Sophie's eyes traced patterns in the frost blooming across the glass. "Where are we going?" she asked. "To my house. It's close, safe from the wind. We'll find your mom as soon as the weather lets up." Duke's house was small, but orderly. Its walls lined with hunting gear and faded photographs, one of a woman and infant long gone. He brewed cocoa, adding extra milk for comfort, and spooned out oatmeal. Sophie's hands shook as she ate. Duke sat across, studying her expression, searching for clues. "Can you tell me what happened? Where is your house?" She shook her head. "We don't live here. We were driving. Got stuck. She said to keep moving no matter what. Said there was a house nearby with a kind man who could help." The weight of responsibility grew heavier. Duke tried calling again. Nothing. He checked the window every few minutes. Visibility still 0. Snow relentless. As the hours passed, Sophie warmed up, growing braver. She explored the living room, noticing a drawing on the fridge. "Did you have a little girl?" she asked softly. Duke hesitated, then nodded. "A long time ago." There was comfort in Sophie's presence, but also anxiety. Duke gathered blankets and extra layers, showing Sophie the basics of staying warm. He taught her how to recognize signs of frostbite, held her hand to ensure circulation. "If you feel numb, tell me right away." Midday, Duke put on his thickest coat and tried venturing outside, calling for Sophie's mother. His voice was swallowed instantly by the wind. He trekked 100 meters, eyes searching for movement, for any sign. He returned, defeated, and promised himself he would try again the moment the storm eased. Inside, as darkness fell, Sophie confided, "I'm scared. Is Mum going to be okay?" Duke sat beside her, uncertainty gnawing at his heart. "I don't know, Sophie, but I won't give up on her." She smiled weakly, clutching her rabbit. "Mom always says you have to trust good people." That night, Duke barricaded the doors and windows, left his rifle loaded by the mantel. He couldn't sleep, haunted by the image of Sophie's mother somewhere out there, frozen or trapped. He wrote a note for himself: "Search again at sunrise." The storm raged for hours. Sophie slept fitfully, whimpering in her dreams, calling out for her mother. Duke watched, vowing to do whatever it took, knowing the real challenge was just beginning: survival, hope, and the return of a child to her family. As dawn crept, Duke watched the snow swirl outside, gripping tight to resolve. Tomorrow, he would search again, and he would not stop until Sophie's story was complete. Night blurred into morning, with little respite from the storm's howl. The world outside was buried, the porch gone, the truck half swallowed, the old wind chime encased in ice and silent for the first winter Duke could recall. The generator flickered and coughed, fighting a losing battle against the biting cold. Inside the cabin, shadows stretched long and blue over the wood floors as Sophie finally dozed into uneasy sleep, curled in a nest of blankets and faded quilts. Duke sat by the window, elbows on his knees, sleep never quite coming. He scanned the swirling white beyond the grimy pane, searching for movement. The only evidence of Sophie's arrival were faint tracks, already erased by drifts. Part of him believed for one aching moment that he'd imagined it all, a fever dream born from isolation, grief, and snow. But then she shifted, muttered something in her sleep, and clutched her rabbit tighter. At dawn, light filtered through the storm, fractured and pale. The wind had slowed a little, but the snow hadn't let up. Duke crept into the kitchen to put water on the stove, careful not to wake Sophie. Every movement felt louder in the unfamiliar silence of the house, now changed by a child's presence. As the kettle rattled, Sophie woke, blinking in confusion at the unfamiliar walls. For a second, she looked as if she might cry, but she swallowed it down. Stoic, Duke thought. Already learned too much hardship for a child. "Morning," Duke said softly, offering her a mug of cocoa. "We made it through the night, that's something." She nodded, sitting up and blinking at the creeping light. "I dreamed I saw Mom," she whispered. "Out on the road. She was waving to me, but then it snowed so hard I couldn't see her anymore." Duke wished for comfort he barely remembered how to give. "Dreams can be strange in a storm. We'll get through this. Just have to wait for the snow to stop, and then I'll go after her, promise." Sophie nodded, but her hands trembled as she sipped. Duke busied himself, checking supplies: canned food, bottled water, batteries, and firewood. He'd always kept a winter stash, but each ration now had to stretch for 2. The hours crawled. Sophie watched cartoons from Duke's old DVD player when the power held, drawing rabbits and houses on scrap paper when it failed. She asked about everything. The stuffed fox above the mantel. "Did you catch that yourself?" The deer antlers by the hall, the photograph of Duke's lost family. Duke answered simply, quietly pleased by her curiosity. The cabin felt almost unfamiliar, alive with Sophie's gentle questioning and careful explorations. Yet the worry never left his mind. He looked at the map. I traced possible routes Sophie and her mother might have taken, calculated the dangers of exposure. That afternoon, Duke bundled up, layering 2 coats for warmth, and prepared to try searching again. "You stay here, lock the door behind me, and don't open it for anyone but me. Not even if they say they're police, not until you hear my voice, understand?" Sophie nodded gravely. "I can do that." Outside, the cold was violent. Duke staggered into the storm's teeth, forcing himself forward, calling out for any sign. "Hello? Is anyone there? Lisa?" The wind shredded his words, stung his cheeks raw. His boots broke trail with agonizing slowness. Tree branches, heavy with snow, bent like penitents. Once he thought he heard a distant voice, but it vanished quickly into the howling void. After nearly an hour, Duke's legs ached and his lungs burned. He found nothing, no shelter, no broken-down car, no clue to Sophie's mother's fate. With numb fingers, he marked a red scarf on a fir tree at the furthest point before he had to turn back, a sign for other searchers, or maybe just for himself. Back at the house, frostbite tingled in his fingers as he made a fire, taking up half the remaining wood. Sophie sat by the flames, silent. She glanced at him, worry sharp in her gaze. "It's bad out there," Duke admitted, "but the storm will break soon. I've seen worse. When it does, help will come, or we'll go looking ourselves." She nodded, eyes on the window as the snow kept falling. Evening came and Sophie was restless. She asked for stories. Duke told her about growing up on the ridge, how winters could last into April, how he once saved a neighbor's dog from the river's ice. In turn, Sophie shyly recounted the trip with her mom, how the car started making strange noises, how her mother kept singing soft lullabies to keep her calm as the sky turned white. As the night deepened, Sophie helped Duke prepare a meal, canned beans and the last of his bread, toasted over the fire. She ate quietly, occasionally glancing at Duke as if searching his face for reassurance he never found in his own heart. Before bed, Duke taught Sophie how to tape plastic over the windows to keep drafts out, how to listen for the faint creaks that meant the generator was failing. He handed her his flashlight, taught her to use it in short bursts to conserve the batteries. When she was finally settled in bed, she stared up at the ceiling. "Do you ever get scared?" she asked suddenly. Duke hesitated, thinking of all the sleepless nights, the memories that trailed him like shadows. "Yes, a lot more than I'd ever admit. But when you're scared for someone else, it's different. You do what you have to do just to keep moving." Sophie was quiet for a long time. "I want Mom to find us." "She will," Duke promised, even as doubt gnawed at him. "We'll give her every chance." Sophie fell asleep, gripping his hand, and Duke stayed there long after, listening to her steady breathing and the wind pushing hard against the walls. Outside, the storm at last began to weaken. The sky cleared in places, navy and cold, moonlight glinting on a world made new and dangerous by snow. Duke watched from the window, making plans. At first light, he'd prepare a sled, pack what food remained, and teach Sophie how to signal for help. But for now, inside the small cabin, hope and fear kept vigil together, waiting as the storm loosened its grip for what might be found or lost in the thaw. At first light, the world looked relentlessly unchanged, yet something in the air was different. Duke awoke in his battered armchair, neck stiff, a wool blanket thrown over his legs. Sophie slept on the couch, face pressed to the faded cushions, rabbit clutched within her embrace. Outside, the wind had lost its bite, and sunlight filtered through the battered blinds, turning the crusted snow into a canvas of blue and gold. Duke moved quietly, not wishing to wake Sophie yet. He brewed strong coffee, boiled what remained of the oats, and took a moment to listen. Really listen. For the first time in days, he heard the faint drip of thawing icicles beneath the eaves and the distant call of a bird, brave enough to hope for spring. After breakfast, Duke unbolted the front door. The snow was hip-deep but breakable, glazed only on the top. Surprisingly, the silence felt deeper than the storm's roar. It pressed in, expectant and vast. Duke gazed over the fields, unrecognizable yet all his, where only the red scarf, his marker, fluttered on a distant tree. He dressed himself and Sophie in as many layers as he could find: sweaters, coats, scarves, boots with 2 pairs of socks. He fashioned a makeshift sled from an old wooden crate, tying it with rope salvaged from the shed. Sophie watched, curious but subdued. "Are we leaving?" she asked, her eyes wide. Duke shook his head. "We're not going far, just making sure we're ready if we need to be. We should be visible in case searchers come this way, and I want to check the closest road. Sometimes people leave signs for each other." He packed water, half a loaf of bread, a flare, the flashlight, and his last good map. Sophie insisted on bringing her rabbit and a crumpled drawing, "so Mom knows we're together." They trudged into the snow, Duke breaking trail, Sophie following doggedly. Each step crunched with the sound of winter refusing surrender. They made slow progress across the meadow, Duke pulling the sled as Sophie alternately walked beside him and rode when the snow deepened. Duke talked as they went, soft and steady, stories of the ridge, how the fields looked in midsummer, how the river ran swift in spring and caught rainbows in the afternoon sun. He pointed out landmarks hidden by snow, the stump where he built tree houses as a boy, the row of birches where deer often grazed. Sophie grew more animated as she listened, peppering Duke with questions about his childhood, about the woman and baby in the faded photograph, about why he lived here alone. It was as if the act of walking, of carving a path through the impossible landscape, gave her courage to press for answers. As they neared the tree with the red scarf, Sophie stopped abruptly. "Was it lonely here before I came?" Duke hesitated, words catching. "Yes," he admitted simply, "but some kinds of lonely are quieter than others." She nodded. "I'm glad Mom sent me to you. She said you'd be kind." The moment hung between them, a tentative trust, something fragile blooming, between survivor and child. Duke knelt and tied Sophie's scarf tighter, thinking not for the first time that survival meant more than making it through a storm. It meant letting someone in. At the edge of the road, they found old tire tracks softened by new snow. Nearby, a ragged scarf, striped, unfamiliar, hung from a post, a sign Duke recognized as a plea or a marker. Nearby, broken shrubbery and footprints circled chaotically. Duke examined the scene with the eyes of someone used to searching. "Looks like someone tried to dig in for shelter," he muttered. "Maybe your mom passed this way." Sophie's breaths quickened. "She was here? Maybe. This is fresh. Let's leave something behind, just in case she comes back." They built a marker, Sophie's drawing inside a plastic bag, tied high for visibility, anchored with a ribbon from her hair. "If you find this, we're safe at the house," she wrote, printing each letter meticulously. Duke added the address. Rural route, no number, but known to anyone local. On their return trek, Sophie tired, so Duke carried her most of the way. She leaned sleepily on his shoulder. "Tell me about your little girl," she whispered. Duke's heart twisted. He hesitated. He hadn't said her name in years. "Emma," he said at last. "She loved snow. Always wanted to build the tallest snowmen. Lost her to fever many winters ago." Sophie's eyes shone with empathy. "Do you miss her?" "Every day." His voice broke, but Sophie didn't look away. "But I get to help you now. That means something." Inside, the cabin was cold, but their spirits lighter. Duke built a fire, let Sophie peel potatoes as he prepared stew with the last vegetables. They left a pot simmering as evening fell, sharing quiet stories and hopes, of rescuers, of mothers, of a spring that would surely come. As darkness crept in, headlights flashed through the woods, distant, wavering, then gone. Sophie shouted, hope wild in her voice. Duke rushed to the porch, waving his flare, but the lights flickered and vanished, the silence deeper than before. That night, fear arrived with the wind, but so did resolve. Duke strategized. Tomorrow they'd travel farther, risk more. They'd search the ridge, leave better signs, muster hope enough to last. They'd survive together. Sophie fell asleep, wrapped in Duke's old coat, her breathing slowing, safe for now. On the windowsill, frost etched wild patterns, proof the world outside was still dangerous, but their bond within the cabin grew warmer. Before sleeping, Duke whispered a promise to the storm, "We're not giving up, not yet." And the blizzard, for once, seemed to listen. Dawn arrived, slow and purple, gentle after days of cruelty. The world outside looked sculpted anew. Every branch bowed beneath the impossible weight of snow, every rooftop sparkling under a pale sun. Duke stood at the window, coffee cooling in his hands, watching his own breath swirl in the cold air. Sophie stirred beneath layers of blankets, her hair tangled, cheeks flushed pink against the chill. When she opened her eyes, their gazes met. There was a question in hers, one that Duke recognized. Would today be the day they found her mother? Would today bring rescue, or just more waiting? He smiled softly, hiding the heaviness in his chest. Breakfast was silent but efficient. Cereal softened in milk, an orange split in two, bread toasted over the fire, the last of the jam scraped from the bottom of the jar. Outside, the world was hushed, the kind of quiet that precedes either disaster or salvation. Duke checked the radio. Static. He tried the phone for the 100th time. Only silence. Sophie dressed herself in layers, each movement careful and deliberate. "Where are we going today?" she asked, voice soft. "We're going further," Duke replied. "We'll check where the creek bends under the ridge. Lots of people get turned around there in storms. If your mom left any sign, that's as likely a place as any." He packed supplies, water, beef jerky, 2 protein bars, hand warmers, a flare, extra gloves. Sophie slipped her drawing from the window, tucking it inside her pocket. The rabbit came, as always, tucked beneath her coat. They stepped outside into the strange brightness, each crunch of their boots swallowed by the snow. The air smelled clean, unspoiled, almost medicinal. As they moved over the field, Sophie broke the silence. "Did you ever get lost out here?" Duke nodded. "Once, as a boy. Spent half a day wandering before my father found me. Learned respect for the land that day." Sophie mulled over the reply. "I'm not scared. I just want Mum to know I'm trying." Duke squeezed her gloved hand. He didn't answer. The promise of hope was delicate, easily broken if spoken too loudly. As they crossed into the lower woods, the snow yielded, and the going grew easier. Birds circled in the sky, the first Duke had seen in days. A set of deer tracks zigzagged across the creek, vanishing up the hill. They followed the curve, eyes alert for anything out of place. Half an hour in, Sophie froze. "There! Look!" In a stand of birches, something fluttered on a low branch, a mitten, child-sized, red with white trim. Sophie rushed ahead, heart slamming. Duke caught up, inspecting the mitt. He turned it over, muddy, damp, but not frozen. He searched the ground, found half-buried footprints, smaller than his. Sophie scanned the woods frantically. She was here, right? "Maybe yesterday," Duke said, examining the prints. "Maybe the day before." They pressed on, calling out occasionally, always listening. At times the forest seemed to listen too, branches creaking with stories of their own. They made it past 2 hills before pausing for water and jerky. Sophie grew talkative with hunger and fatigue. She asked Duke about his old friends, why he lived alone, who taught him to light fires, what made him stay long after most neighbors left for easier lives in cities downstream. He answered honestly, surprising himself. He told stories of Emma, her laughter echoing through fields in summers past, her tiny footprints beside his in the mud. He spoke of loss, the kind that empties rooms and leaves memories nested in every drawer. And he spoke of second chances, of how sometimes the world puts someone else in your path, and maybe that's a way to heal, even if you're not ready. As the day lingered, They reached the top of the ridge. Far below, the land opened into valleys carved by centuries of water and wind. Near a fallen log, they spotted something more: candy wrappers, a plastic bottle, and a page torn from a notebook, the handwriting faint but legible. Looking for help. Car stuck. Sophie, cold but safe. Walking east. Lisa. The world stopped for a moment. Duke tensed, scanning the line of trees. "She was here not 2 days ago," he murmured. Sophie gripped the note, hands shaking. "She's alive. She's trying to find help. If she went east, she may have tried for the main road." Guilt and relief warred inside Duke. Had they searched west in vain? Had he failed Sophie? He steadied himself, purpose swelling inside. Returning was harder. The cold bit deep, hunger gnawed at their patience, and by the time pink twilight bled across the sky, Sophie stumbled with exhaustion. At the cabin, Duke coaxed a fire, cooked a thin soup with beans and rice, let Sophie drown 3 crackers in the bowl. She spoke less, exhaustion and hope swirling behind her eyes. Night fell heavy and absolute. Duke tried the radio again, this time hearing faint voices. Rescue teams searching the forest, calling out lost names. His heart leapt. He answered, voice cracking through static, giving location, names, directions. Before sleep, Sophie nestled beside Duke. "I think I dreamed Mum found me tonight," she whispered. "Hold on to that," Duke replied. "Dreams tell us what's possible." As Sophie's breathing slowed, Duke sat by the fire, eyes on the window, mind full of plans and prayers. Tomorrow they would go east. Tomorrow, maybe, hope would be more than just a word. Sunrise on the 5th day was a dim silver line filtered through drifting clouds. The temperature had risen by a hair, turning the snow near the cabin's base into a slick crust, dazzling in the uncertain light, dangerous but image-rich for those with nowhere safer to go. Inside, Duke and Sophie moved with purpose, silent in their preparations, the rhythm of 2 survivors becoming a single pulse. Duke laid out the plan. "We head east today, follow the path your mother left. If we move by the creek, keep an eye out for tracks. Once we get to the road, we wait and signal. There'll be more searches today. The storm broke. People can move again." He checked the radio. Nothing but hopeful hiss. He wrapped Sophie in every layer he owned, his own coat stretched thin on his frame, and packed a day's rations, water, 2 flares, the battered map, his father's old hunting knife, and a small medicine kit. Remnants of a life lived anticipating emergencies. They stepped outside. The sky was pewter, clouds shifting overhead, and the land swept in hush. Sophie hesitated only a moment, looking over her shoulder at the cabin, her shelter. Her brief home, before taking Duke's hand and descending into the field. For the first hours, the only sounds were wind, boots breaking crust, Duke's voice murmuring encouragement, and Sophie's small, resolute replies. They passed landmarks twice visited, then entered unknown ground. Duke monitored Sophie constantly for any signs of hypothermia, numbness, confusion, weak answers. She marched on, her childish stubbornness the glue to her frail body. Occasionally the snow revealed messages, an empty can, the heel of a print, or a crushed piece of peppermint candy. Each found object sparked hope and anxiety in Sophie's face, which Duke answered only with a squeeze to her gloved hand. Near midday, they reached a stretch where the creek had swallowed the path under a glass sheet of ice. Duke tested the crossing, coaxing Sophie across on hands and knees. On the far bank, they stumbled on a scarf, a woman's, floral and faded. Sophie's knees buckled. She pressed the fabric to her lips, trembling. "It's hers," she sobbed. Duke wrapped her in his arms. "She's close. She wants us to find her." They pressed on, driven more by hope than strength. Mid-afternoon. A distant engine growled, a snowmobile, then voices. "Rescue! Hello!" Duke fired a flare, the red streak arcing over blue shadows. Shouts echoed. Sophie screamed, "Over here!" before her voice failed in tears. Two rescuers in red parkas materialized through the trees, faces flurried, focused. "Are you Lisa's girl?" one asked, kneeling beside Sophie. Her trembling smile and nod were all the answer he needed. Within seconds, they were ushered to a sheltered spot, given heated drinks, blankets, checked for frostbite. The urgency of the medics spoke of another mission. Lisa was found a mile east, alive but weak, huddled beside the wreckage of a car, barely visible beneath a collapsed pine. Duke and Sophie were bundled into the snowmobile sled. The cold now seemed a distant thing as emotion pulsed in their veins. Relief, shock, disbelief that rescue had arrived, that the end of fear was more overwhelming than fear itself. The reunion on the road was quiet, sobs and embraces, words lost in wool and exhaustion. Lisa, pale and gaunt, squeezed Sophie to her, whispered promises, apologies, love. She looked at Duke, eyes shining with gratitude, too great for any language, and squeezed his calloused hand with both of hers. The world spun in and out of clarity. Rescue workers bustling, radios crackling, handshakes and instructions, offers of food and medical checks. Sophie clung to her mother. Duke kept close by, watching quietly. They rode in a truck toward Miller's Ridge, the landscape thawing under the late sun. Through the window, Duke watched as the trees thinned and the roofs of the town came into view. Ordinary, battered by snow, but ordinary again. The hospital was busy with others pulled from snowbanks, the waiting room buzzing with relief and nervous laughter. In the quiet after checkups, Duke lingered by the window, watching the sun dip and turn the world gold. Sophie shuffled over. "Will you stay?" Duke thought of his empty house, the tracks they'd left together, the photograph on his mantle of the girl he had lost, and the life he still had to fill. "If you want me to," he answered. Lisa came, threadbare but smiling, to sit with them. She reached for both their hands. "I think we found each other, all of us," she murmured. Night fell on Miller's Ridge. Sirens faded. The snow outside lost its threat, became just cold again. In a hospital room lit by the pulsing orange of the street, Duke, Sophie and Lisa sat together, understanding that some families are forged not by blood, but by survival, and by the small, stubborn hope that grows even in the worst winter. Outside, new snow began to fall, lightly, softly, innocent again.